A white cop pulls over a black driver. Just another stop, or so he thought. But the man behind the wheel wasn't who he expected. What happened next? It shook the officer, and changed everything. This story is real. It's powerful. And you need to hear it, from beginning to end. It was a gray-skied Wednesday afternoon on the edge of Baton Rouge, where the streets were still slick from an earlier storm. Officer Mark Delaney sat in his cruiser, half bored, eyes scanning passing cars for something, or someone, that didn't fit. Then he saw it, a black Chevy Malibu with tinted windows and Illinois plates. One occupant. Black male. Mid-30s. Alone. Delaney flicked on the siren without hesitation. The Malibu slowed, blinked, and pulled onto the shoulder. The driver rolled down his window. Rain spattered the frame. Delaney approached like he was walking into a threat. One hand on his belt. License and registration, he barked. The man moved slowly, hands visible. Sure, officer. It's in the glove box. Move real slow. No surprises. Of course, the driver said, retrieving the documents and handing them over. Name's Nathaniel Rhodes, Delaney read aloud, eyeing the ID like it might bite him. You from Illinois? Yes, sir. Driving through to Atlanta. Business. Delaney peered in. What kind of business? Consulting. Consulting, Delaney repeated, voice laced with skepticism. For who? Federal Justice Department. Delaney snorted. That right? What kind of consultant drives through backroads Louisiana in a rental car? Nathaniel didn't answer. He was used to the tone. The smirk. The assumption. Delaney stepped back, circling the car. Tapped the trunk. Pop this for me. Officer, I'd prefer not without probable cause. Delaney spun back toward the window. Don't start quoting the law to me. You hiding something, Mr. Consultant? Drugs? Guns? Dead body maybe? Just my luggage. Out of the car. Now. Nathaniel exhaled but obeyed. Rain pelted his shoulders. Delaney pushed him against the hood, spread his arms, patted him down with rough hands. Hands soft for a man on the road. Your kind usually keep them busy with something illegal. My kind? Don't play dumb. You think the suit and the fancy words mean you're better than everyone else? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. Another cruiser arrived. Back up. A second officer began searching the vehicle. Nathaniel stood silent, soaked, humiliated. Passers-by slowed. One snapped a photo. Not so smooth now, huh? Delaney sneered. But after 10 minutes, the car came up clean. No contraband. No weapons. Just a carry-on bag, business folders, a pair of dress shoes. Delaney handed the documents back. Watch yourself, Mr. Rhodes. Not everyone's as patient as me. Nathaniel took them, met Delaney's eyes. Calm. Clear. I'll be sure to mention your patience when I file my report. What report? You'll see. He drove away without another word. 3 days later, the rain had passed, but a different kind of storm was about to break inside the Baton Rouge Municipal Building. The city council's main chamber had been cleared and filled with rows of folding chairs, a projector, and a modest podium set beneath the seal of the city of Baton Rouge. A banner stretched across the back wall, Federal Oversight and Community Accountability, a partnership for justice. Officer Mark Delaney sat in the back row, arms folded, scanning the room with a detached disinterest that bordered on disdain. He was here because attendance had been strongly encouraged by the department. Bureaucratic fluff, he thought. A box to check for some DC consultant to say they did their due diligence. He was scrolling through his phone when the moderator stepped up to the mic. Thank you all for being here tonight. We have a special guest with us from the Department of Justice, an advisor who's spent over a decade working on community police relations and federal investigations into civil rights violations. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Nathaniel Rhodes. The name landed like a dropped hammer in Delaney's gut. He looked up, blinked. It was him. The man from the roadside. The man he'd soaked, searched, and insulted. Nathaniel Rhodes walked out in a dark navy suit, crisp white shirt, and silk tie. His shoes polished. His posture tall. He approached the podium calmly, greeted the room with a gentle nod, and waited as the murmurs settled. Delaney felt heat crawl up his neck. This couldn't be happening. Not him. Not here. Good evening, Nathaniel began, his voice even, steady. Thank you to the city of Baton Rouge for welcoming me. My work focuses on how institutions either earn or erode public trust. Tonight, we begin a conversation about how this department, your department, can reflect the dignity of the people it serves. Delaney shifted uncomfortably. A few heads turned toward him. Had anyone else connected the dots? Nathaniel's eyes swept the room. They passed over Delaney but didn't linger. It was worse that way. I've spent the last month reviewing records, Nathaniel continued, flipping open a folder. Complaint logs, body cam footage, use of force reports. But data doesn't tell the whole story. People do. He paused. Then, for the first time, he looked directly at Delaney. 3 days ago, I was pulled over in this city. For no stated cause. I was removed from my vehicle, detained in the rain, and spoken to like my rights were a nuisance. I said nothing at the time. But that encounter wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom. Silence gripped the room. Delaney stared back, throat dry. I didn't mention my credentials then because I shouldn't have to, Nathaniel said. Respect shouldn't be conditional. Rights shouldn't hinge on a badge. And dignity shouldn't depend on where you're driving or what color you are when you do it. Murmurs rose. Someone coughed. The chief of police, seated 2 rows ahead of Delaney, glanced back briefly, then forward again. Nathaniel continued. We'll be conducting interviews. Reviewing procedures. But more importantly, we'll be listening, to residents, to officers, to everyone caught in the space between power and protection. Change doesn't start with policies. It starts with truth. He closed his folder and stepped back. Applause came slowly at first. Scattered. But it grew. Delaney sat frozen. That voice, calm, unflinching, echoed louder than any siren he'd ever used. He had assumed that day on the road was just another stop. Just another man. He had been wrong. The drive home that night was the quietest Mark Delaney had ever known. The roads were familiar, but they seemed colder, dimmer, as if the city itself had turned its back on him. He gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary, knuckles pale against the dashboard lights. He couldn't stop hearing that voice, measured, articulate, calm. A voice he had mocked. A man he had humiliated. And yet, that man stood under the seal of justice and turned the room against him with nothing more than the truth. Delaney had always believed he was one of the good ones. He followed procedure. He wrote his reports. He shook hands at the grocery store. But as he sat at a red light, those illusions began to peel away like old paint. He had seen a black man on a lonely road and made assumptions. About guilt. About status. About threat. He had acted not out of danger, but out of instinct, one trained not by law, but by years of unchallenged bias. At home, he poured a drink. The bourbon didn't help. He sat at the kitchen table long after the ice had melted, staring at nothing. He heard Nathaniel's words again, respect shouldn't be conditional. For the first time in years, Delaney couldn't sleep. At the Justice Department's local office the next morning, Nathaniel was already at work. The energy around him was sharp, focused. He didn't gloat about what happened the night before. He didn't have to. The message had landed where it needed to. But alone, in the quiet of his borrowed office, Nathaniel let himself breathe out. Deeply. Slowly. The weight hadn't left him. That stop had brought back more than discomfort. It had stirred ghosts. His father, a veteran, pulled over on a snowy night in 1991 and called, "boy," before being cuffed. His older brother, framed for shoplifting as a teen and left with a permanent record. Nathaniel had survived, thrived even, but it had never been without scars. And now he was here, trying to fix a system that still didn't see men like him as fully human until they stood in suits behind podiums. He rubbed his temples. He didn't want revenge. He wanted reckoning. 2 days later, Delaney was summoned to the chief's office. Chief Morales didn't mince words. "You were named, Mark. Not directly. But everyone knows. I got the mayor calling me asking why a DOJ advisor is recounting a traffic stop like it was a criminal takedown." Delaney stayed silent. "You know who that man is now?" Delaney nodded. Shame burned at his collarbone. "Then you know you made a mistake." "Yes, sir." "This isn't going away," Morales said. "There's going to be an internal review. Rhodes has requested interviews with officers individually. He'll probably want to talk to you." Delaney exhaled. "When?" "Tomorrow." When Delaney stepped into the conference room the next day, the walls felt closer than usual. Nathaniel sat at the table, a legal pad before him, pen in hand. There was no bitterness in his face. Just observation. Calm. The same unsettling calm from the roadside. "Officer Delaney," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Delaney sat. His throat was tight. There was a long pause. Nathaniel didn't speak right away. Instead, he let the silence press in. He watched Delaney closely, not with judgment, but with the solemn weight of someone expecting something real. "Why did you stop me?" Nathaniel asked finally. Delaney swallowed. "Out-of-state plate. Single occupant. Looked unusual." "Unusual?" "Didn't recognize the vehicle." "You weren't speeding. But I thought it was worth checking." "Did I give you any reason to suspect criminal activity?" Delaney hesitated. "No. So why escalate it? Why ask to search my car?" Delaney looked down at his hands. They were clenched. "Because I didn't expect someone like you to talk back." Nathaniel leaned back slightly. "So the problem wasn't my behavior. It was my confidence." Delaney nodded, ashamed. "I felt challenged." Nathaniel's voice softened. "And how many other men have you felt challenged by, Mark? How many others who didn't wear suits? Who didn't have titles?" Delaney had no answer. "I'm not here to destroy your career," Nathaniel said. "But this isn't just about you. It's about the reflex. The unchecked assumptions. The fear masked as authority." "I know," Delaney whispered. "I see it now." Nathaniel nodded. "Then maybe there's hope." For the first time in his career, Mark Delaney didn't feel like a cop. He felt like a man who had been stripped bare, forced to look in a mirror he'd spent decades avoiding. And in that mirror, he saw not a villain, but someone dangerously unaware. That, Nathaniel knew, was where change had to begin. And maybe, just maybe, it had. The days that followed felt like slow drips from a leaky faucet. For Officer Mark Delaney, each hour was another chance to stew in a discomfort he had long learned to bury. Shame, once foreign to him, had made itself at home, sitting heavy in his chest. At work, he felt watched, even when no eyes were on him. At home, his wife had noticed the shift. "You're not sleeping," she said one night, reaching for his hand. Delaney didn't answer. Because what could he say? That the man he'd humiliated had turned out to be a federal agent. That the guilt gnawed at him not just because of that moment, but because it wasn't the first. He stared at the ceiling long after she drifted to sleep. There had been others. Too many. Names he didn't remember. Faces that blurred together. Black men, mostly young. Stopped for tinted windows, cracked tail lights, nervous behavior. He remembered the smell of fear, the way their hands shook as they reached for their wallets. He remembered the pride he'd felt, misplaced pride, when they'd looked at him with terrified eyes. He told himself it was about respect. But now he understood, it was fear. Manufactured fear. And it wasn't justice. At the precinct, the mood had changed. Officers whispered when Delaney passed. A few had his back, offering the usual defensive lines, "You didn't know who he was. He could have been anyone. It's not like you beat the guy." But even they didn't look him in the eye for long. The truth was out, and it left no room for excuses. Delaney had started reviewing his own body cam footage from the past year. Voluntarily. What he saw made his stomach churn. The tone he used. The presumptions. The casual commands barked at people who hadn't done anything wrong. He'd told himself he was being thorough. Tactical. But now, watching it back, he saw something else, a pattern. A ledger of moments where his authority had come at the expense of someone else's dignity. And most of them were black. Nathaniel, meanwhile, continued his work. He met with clergy, activists, retired officers. He listened more than he spoke. But behind his calm demeanor, he carried the weight of something older than anger. He knew this wasn't just about Mark Delaney. It was about all the Delaneys who'd never been caught. The ones who still hid behind the badge, weaponizing the silence of those too scared, or too tired, to fight back. But Nathaniel wasn't tired. Not anymore. He was done being polite about injustice. He sat down with Chief Morales one afternoon. "There's a cultural issue," Nathaniel said, placing a thick folder on the desk. "Not just a few bad apples. It's the soil. And if the department wants to survive, the roots need to be exposed." Morales rubbed his temples. "You're talking about more than training videos. I'm talking about a reckoning." The chief nodded slowly. He wasn't ready, but he was listening. That evening, Delaney stood in front of his bathroom mirror, shaving cream on his jaw, razor in hand. He looked at himself, really looked. Who had he become? He thought of the boy from 10 years ago. The one he'd cuffed outside a convenience store because he was loitering. The boy had been 15. Delaney never even called his parents. He thought of a man he'd stopped outside a bar, forced to sit on the curb while his white friend watched, silent. That man had tears in his eyes. Delaney mocked him then, called him dramatic. And now, standing there, razor paused mid-air, Delaney saw that he'd been the one living in drama. Pretending he was the line between chaos and order, when he was part of the chaos himself. The cut on his jaw went unnoticed. He didn't feel it. The next morning, Nathaniel requested another meeting. This time, in private. Delaney agreed. They met in a small room on the second floor of the Civic Center. No cameras. No observers. Nathaniel was already seated. He didn't stand. Delaney sat across from him, back straight, hands folded tightly. "I've done things," Delaney began, "that I justified for years. Stops. Searches. Things I thought were just part of the job. I see now, they weren't." Nathaniel nodded once. "And what do you want me to do with that?" Delaney's throat tightened. "I don't know. I just needed to say it. I needed someone to hear it." Nathaniel studied him. "I'm not your priest. I'm not here to absolve you. I know. But I'll tell you this, the first step isn't confession. It's accountability. What are you going to do now, Officer Delaney? Not to fix what's broken, you can't, but to start rebuilding something worth trusting. Delaney's eyes burned. He hadn't expected forgiveness. But he also hadn't expected this, a quiet challenge, offered not out of vengeance, but from a deeper well of clarity. I don't know yet, Delaney whispered. But I want to try. Nathaniel leaned forward. Then start by listening. Start by remembering every name, every face. Don't forget what it cost them. And don't ever let yourself forget what you took. Delaney nodded. Not because it was over. Because it had only just begun. 2 weeks later, the town of Baton Rouge felt different. There were no protests. No riots. No breaking news headlines. But something quieter had begun to stir in the neighborhoods and precincts. Conversations in barbershops sounded a little more pointed. Town hall meetings filled just a little faster. Officers looked each other in the eyes a little longer before climbing into patrol cars. At the heart of it was a man who had been stopped on the side of the road for doing nothing wrong. And another man who had finally stopped himself long enough to see who he'd become. The department had formally launched a cultural review. Mandatory bias training was announced, not the usual PowerPoint gloss, but a full partnership with community leaders, legal scholars, and, most importantly, survivors of police misconduct. A civilian review board was proposed, and for the first time, it wasn't dismissed out of hand. Officer Mark Delaney didn't lead these changes. He didn't take a microphone. He didn't make a speech. But he showed up. He sat in the rooms. He listened to the stories of people who had never trusted the badge he wore. He said little, because he knew words couldn't undo years of silence. He was assigned temporarily to administrative duty during the review process. Some officers called it a slap on the wrist. Others called it a warning. Delaney called it a mercy. He spent his days reading policies, testimonies, reports. Then, slowly, he started writing. He wrote letters to the people he could remember, the ones he'd stopped without cause, the ones who'd walked away shaken while he drove off thinking nothing of it. Most he would never find. Some were too far gone in the past, their names unrecorded. But he wrote anyway. For them. For himself. Nathaniel remained in town longer than expected. His report had grown larger than he anticipated, full of findings that stretched well beyond Delaney's single mistake. But it was Delaney's mistake that made the data human. One evening, Nathaniel visited a youth center downtown. He was invited to speak, but what mattered more was who stayed after. A 17-year-old named Jalen. Curious eyes. Too cautious for his age. My cousin got stopped, Jalen said. Didn't do anything. They just pulled him out the car. Slammed him down. Said he looked like someone. Nathaniel nodded slowly. And what do you think of cops now? Jalen shrugged. Ain't about what I think. I just keep my head down. Nathaniel leaned forward. You shouldn't have to. That's what we're trying to change. The boy scoffed quietly, but he didn't walk away. And that, Nathaniel knew, was something. On a gray Friday morning, nearly a month after the stop, Delaney knocked on a door he had never expected to approach. A modest office building. 3rd floor. DOJ Field Unit. Nathaniel opened it himself. There was a pause. Delaney didn't have a speech. He only had what he hadn't said that day. I never thought I was the problem, he began. But I was. I let the uniform do my thinking. And I'm sorry. Not just for that day. For all of it. For what came before. For who I let myself be. Nathaniel studied him. The silence felt like judgment. But when he spoke, it wasn't condemnation that came. It's not about me accepting your apology, Nathaniel said. It's about you not needing someone to forgive you to do better. Delaney nodded slowly. I don't expect to earn trust again. I just want to be someone who stops breaking it. That, finally, seemed to reach something in Nathaniel's eyes. Not softness. But recognition. Weeks passed. Summer rolled in. Nathaniel prepared to leave Louisiana. His assignment had ended, but the work never did. As he packed the last of his things, he walked to the window of his temporary apartment. Below, a police car rolled slowly down the street. He didn't tense this time. In the distance, a father helped his daughter onto a bike. Two teens played music from a cracked phone. Life didn't wait for justice to be complete. It moved anyway. That afternoon, a local newspaper ran a short editorial with no byline. Just a single paragraph. True accountability is not the end of justice, it is the beginning of healing. And healing, like trust, takes time. It takes walking forward, even when the weight of the past pulls at your heels. It takes listening. And changing. And standing up when silence is easier. Justice isn't a verdict. It's a choice, made every day. Delaney clipped the article and taped it inside his locker. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't need to. Months later, long after Nathaniel was gone, a young officer fresh from the academy asked Delaney why he didn't carry the same swagger as the others. Delaney gave a quiet smile. Because I've seen what swagger can hide. The rookie didn't understand it then. But maybe one day he would. And maybe, that day, he'd choose to walk forward too. One stop. One moment. And a truth that couldn't be ignored. Now we want to hear from you. What would you have done, if you were in his shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because these stories don't just deserve to be heard. They deserve to be felt.